Peace. Barghani, Islam, Salam, Hete Pu, Rahubat, Ginolango Ni Nani, Chief Noble Bandele, Elamine, back in the building for another episode. We are about to get into the interpretation of the Constitution today, y'all. So I'm going to just hope y'all, enjoy this, and we're going to break this down. Basically what we're going to deal with today, we're going to deal with taxes and what the Constitution says about tax law. Okay, so it should be a good show. So before we get into that, I want you guys to go and check out indigenousservices.webs.com. It is the one-stop shop for your indigenous needs. And right here, if you click on links when you get there, click on links, you'll see everything. You got all the stuff for public law. You got procedures. Everything you really need to know. There's a lot of information here. So you guys really need to check this out. Go to indigenous services.webs.com and check it out. All right. So let's get into the show today. Today's show is basically about taxes. Okay. And one of the things that I realized was that, and I've known this, is that, there was a time in the Constitution where taxes were limited. And then there was a time that it was not. So what we want to do is look at the Constitution, because we all know, like, the original Constitution is the articles. What is it, the 7 articles of the Constitution? We know there were 7 articles, and those were the original parts of the Constitution. And then we know that shortly after, there were the Bill of Rights. So pretty much what we look at and we feel is that anything after the Bill of Rights is a different type of constitutional law. Those first 10 amendments were like essential parts of the Constitution. They were not registered. They were not ratified. Anything done by Congress. Congress did not have anything to do with these. It was only after the 11th Amendment and after is when you begin to see legislation and congressional powers being used. And with that being said, there's a corruption, it seems, that it may be in your congressional laws. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at how congressional law changed our understanding of taxes and how it changed taxes. Okay, so let's look at this. The first article of the United States Constitution is Article 1, and it's the legislative branch. Okay, so this particular aspect of taxes is in the first article. So if you look at Article 1, Section 9, and in the 4th clause, okay, in your 4th clause, it talks about direct taxes. It says no capitation or direct tax shall be laid unless proportion to the census or enumeration wherein before directed to be taken. Okay? So what does that mean? It's a clause about direct taxes. An example of a direct tax is income tax. Income tax is a direct tax. So we're going to kind of have to deal with that and look at that, okay? So when we look at the Constitution and understanding the Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4, we get a little bit of understanding. So this right here is dealing with the clauses, right? It's dealing with 4 through 7. And we already looked at this. No capitation, blah, 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 right? 4 through 7, taxes, spending, congressional spending. So after that, we get here, and it says that these clauses set limits on how taxes can be levied. Originally, an income tax would not have been allowed. Okay, so it's saying that in the original Constitution, that income tax would have been unconstitutional based on the fact that you have to apportion or have a proportion. Okay, now it says it wouldn't have been allowed, but look, it says, but this was authorized by the 16th Amendment. These prevent taxes from being levied on trade against states. Congress must pay tax legislation to spend the public money and must show how they have spent the money. Okay, so that kind of gives you a little bit of understanding of what was going on in the mind of the early people, the early founders, when they set up the Constitution. There was this thing about proportion or an apportion. So what does that mean? When we're talking about a portion, an example of that would be like gas. When we buy gas, there's a tax on gas. Now it's apportioned to the people because everybody has to pay that tax. And the fact that you don't have to pay that, like that gas is something that you don't have to have. Meaning that you don't have to buy gas necessarily. Now, so I know we feel like we forced to, because if you got a job, you got to buy gas to get in the car, and you got to go where you got to go. But what it's saying is that it's not a direct tax on you per se. Like the example of direct tax is the income tax. Income tax is they're taxing your money directly. Okay, and so we saw what it says in Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4. We seen what it says. Let's read it again, just so I can show you. No capitation or other direct tax shall be laid unless proportioned to the census or enumeration herein before directed to be taken. So it says that, right? But when we look at the 16th Amendment, which is what it directs us to now, the 16th Amendment. When we look at that, let's go to it real quick. When we look at the 16th Amendment, when we look at it, right? Look at what it says. It was Constitution of, okay, now look, this is a 16th Amendment. It says the Congress, now you're talking about the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived without apportionment among the several states and without regard to any census or enumeration. So the 16th Amendment says the total opposite of what's in the Constitution, Article 1. Total opposite. And you got to understand that Congress did not create the Constitution. The original Constitution was founded by the fathers and it was ratified. It was not necessarily a congressional power. But what was this about? Because, now they have the power to, collect money on your taxes, which is a big thing because you're being directly taxed and money being taken out of the taxes, federal taxes, state, all that is being coming out of your paycheck. And that's totally unconstitutional based on this original stand. So what is this all talking about? Why are we even caring about this? Now, I'm going to tell you why. Because for us Moors and melanated people, low key, the tax thing has something to do with slavery. Huh. We didn't think about that. That's something that was not really talked about. It's not even really talked about among your so-called sovereign citizen people. Okay, they don't even talk about this. So let's look at this though. Let's just look at what I mean. What are they trying to convey with that? Okay, so let's look at this article. They're talking about the Constitution, and it says in the Constitution. Let's go. Okay, the original purpose of requiring apportionment for direct federal taxes. Okay, direct federal taxes appears to have been to benefit southern states. Specifically, the apportionment requirement was primarily designed to render impracticable federal head taxes on slaves and federal taxes on land, both major sources of wealth in the 18th century America. Without the requirement of apportionment by state population, the burden of all kind of federal taxes would have fallen mostly on the South because it possessed disproportionately more wealth in land and slaves than did the North. By contrast, apportioning any such tax by state population would have fallen most heavily on the North because it was home to the most populous states. So this apportionment also played a part in the population. You know, taxes have to be spread apportionately to the population, so it would balance out. If you had a larger population, and then but you had this bigger state, you wouldn't get hit with the taxes more, and it would spread the wealth or spread the taxes out among the states. That was, I think, some of the purpose of why your founding fathers decided to do this. But we did not know that it had a lot to do and benefit for the South. So when we're talking about taxes and things of that nature, we also understand that the South had a dilemma with slaves and taxes, because technically, if they were able to tax each individual slave as a whole person, once again the South would have had an upper hand, and it would have caused them to be allowed to even hold more seats in Congress or the Senate, because they would have outnumbered or outpopulated other states and given them a bigger legislative count for their state. So slavery was deeply enrooted in the way that law and even taxes was dealt with, because at the end of the day, slaves were property, and property would be taxed. It's like if you had property of land, they would tax your land. So the land and slaves had a major part to play, because they were one of the major ways of revenue and wealth for states in the South. Okay, so it's important for just us to look and examine the differences that from the original Constitution to these congressional amendments to the Constitution, starting with Amendment 11 and going on. The 16th Amendment is like 2 amendments away from the 14th Amendment, which allowed another type of citizenship to be created out of the 14th Amendment. So, I mean, like, a lot of that plays into the 16th Amendment, okay? Because you got the 14th Amendment that created a federalized citizen, and now, shortly after that, well, I'm not going to say shortly, I mean, it was a few years after that, but the 16th Amendment emerges, and it seems to basically take away what happened or what was given the rights of your original citizens. You know, citizens prior to the 14th Amendment had protection of direct taxes. But under the 14th Amendment, it allowed the 16th Amendment to take away any of those rights of taxes that was used earlier. And so now we live in a time where they deem it reasonable to tax your income. So I think that's important to understand. Before we go, please check out all of my books on Amazon. But this one in particular is The Guide to Religious Marriage, okay, an alternative to civic marriage. I've done several videos on this, but you can check out how to do this and get better understanding of it by going and purchasing it on Amazon.com. And that's pretty much it. Please like this video, give it a thumbs up, and please subscribe. And we will return with a new video soon. Until then, Tuta Nana.